Welcome to Inside CBN Now, where we talk about policies of the Central Bank of Nigeria that affects our daily lives. Whether you are a business owner, a student, or just curious about the economy, we are here to explain the numbers and decisions in a clear and simple way. I am Abiodun Adilowore. Trust in the financial system is crucial for economic stability. When banks operate unfairly, eating charges and opaque rules hurt savings and business growth. Ethical banking ensures transparency, fairness, and accountability, encouraging people and businesses to invest and save confidently. By enforcing these standards, the CBN helps strengthen Nigeria's financial system and support overall economic growth. Today, we explore CBN and ethical banking practices in Nigeria. My guest is Dumebi Oluwole, a seasoned economist and business leader with insights into strategic impact across emerging and frontier markets in Africa. Thanks for joining the discussion.
Thank you for having me.
Why is ethical banking important?
I think it's important to even start from what ethical banking is, so we even understand why this conversation is important and why ethical banking itself is important. And simply put, ethical banking is just a broad term used to describe principles strictly around governance and banking activities to ensure that consumers are protected, and policies are transparent, easy to understand, easy to follow, easy to implement. And I think that's what ethical banking in summary and in simple English, is. And I hope I've been able to explain that properly. And understanding what ethical banking is now takes us to why it is important. Now, banks exist not only to make profit, but to also ensure that people have access, to financial instruments. They're able to keep their money safely. And so the interaction between banks as an institution that are the backbone of an economy interacting with people, it means that there has to be guiding principles for how that interaction should be. And that's where ethical banking comes in, right? So it's extremely important that consumers are protected from a banking standpoint. It's extremely important that banking activities are guided from a financial standpoint. And it's also extremely important that the general, banking environment, both in policy implementation, in consumer framework, in loans, giving of loans, how they interact with the central bank, how they interact with themselves as well. It's extremely important that those interactions are guided and they are well framed, so everyone holds a sense of accountability for the outcomes that eventually come out of these interactions. And one thing to actually mention is that banks are very integral, right, to the entire ecosystem or to the entire macroeconomic system. They are central to other industries. So almost every business has a bank account. They are essential to households. Almost every individual in an economy has a bank account or is actively working to have one or plans to have one. They are essential to the government because aids, grants, loans, debts, all of that happens through the financial system, right? And they're also essential to the policy landscape because they provide the data on how all of the other economic agents I've mentioned interact, and that now guides monetary policy. If the central bank is not well guided by the information that they get from the financial institution, they could obviously make poorly informed policy decisions, and that obviously affects implementation and then all the other economic agents that I've also mentioned. So yes, I would say that's why it's important. I've been able to explain what ethical banking is and why it's important.
Thank you. How does the CBN regulate ethical banking practices in Nigeria?
Ethical banking practice laws and regulations that the central bank has put in place, especially with its move to drive financial inclusion. So there is a financial inclusion drive that began all the way, I think, as of 2022. Before then, we've had ethical banking, excuse me, ethical banking practices coming as far back as 2023 as well, and to some extent it began, even in 2015, right? 2014, 2015. But we did see a lot more moves happen from the corporate governance code of conduct in 2018, which was now further institutionalized under the Institutions Act of 2020, and then regularized again in 2023. And that's when a lot more financial inclusion targets were set and put in place for banks to achieve. But primarily, like you've already mentioned, these ethical banking practices or corporate governance, practices were instituted primarily to just ensure that banks do what they're supposed to do. Their governance structure is clear and it is transparent. Their reporting standards are also clear and they're transparent, and their interaction with consumers are guided under the consumer protection framework. So yes, I would say like that. Those are the guidelines that the central bank has put in place, both in terms of monitoring, evaluation. The policies are already existing, so implementation and monitoring and evaluation is where the central bank is at right now with a lot of these policies that they have for ethical banking.
What is the relationship between CBN's consumer protection framework and ethical banking?
There's a very straight line. Again, like I mentioned, banks have multiple interactions, right, with industries, with the federal government, even with the central bank itself. And they have interactions with themselves, and then they also have interactions with consumers. The goal of most banks, right, like I mentioned earlier, is to make a profit, right? And beyond that, encourage a sound financial ecosystem in an economy. Between banks and consumers, you have number one, deposits. That is a safe place for consumers or households to place their funds. Between that, you also have access to credit. So I need a loan. I can access the bank to say, okay, I want to maybe start a business, and I need a loan, access to credit, and access to credit that is affordable, right? Now, beyond that, apart from these two, there's also receiving of funds, right? So you have a rural member, maybe a grandmother in Ondo State, that has her child living in the US. The child wants to send money to the grandmother every month, right? Remittances, creating that easy transfer or digital payment system where the son abroad can send the money to the mother and the mother receives the money accurately and in a form that she can of course spend it at. And the final thing is access to cash, right? So making sure that there's liquidity within the economy, that people, the market woman that wants to spend 100,000 at the market can easily have access to her cash, give that cash to the other person, and the person can keep it in the bank for safekeeping, right? So with all of these transactions that go on between the banks and consumers, when we look at the consumer protection framework, what is the core of that guideline? Number one, that consumers can effectively own and spend their assets, right? Beyond that, they're able to do this in an environment that does not, in simple words, rip them off, where prices are not too discriminatory, access to these institutions like banks are not discriminatory, and access to the services or assets that financial services providers give to these consumers are not discriminatory. That is, everyone can have access to it. I think at the core of the consumer protection framework, that is what it is. And to guide all of those principles, ethical banking or ethical practices are what guide all of these transactions or all of these interactions. Because again, like I mentioned, ethical banking rests on transparency. So with all of these transactions happening, it has to be transparent. The banks have to be accountable to the people, and by accountable to the people now in terms of the consumer protection framework is, I keep my money in the bank. I want to know that my money is safe, right? I also want to know that there are no hidden charges anywhere that would come and reduce my 10,000 from reduce my 10,000 naira to 9,800 without any proper explanation on what these funds are for. I want to know that if I notice any irregular activities on my bank account, even if the account is blocked, if I come with the appropriate form of identification, you will not still ask me to go to get a police report or some of that sort, right? So that these interactions are properly guided, right? And they're transparent, they're easy to understand, and more importantly, they happen in a seamless manner where consumers are not feeling like they're, you know, tied at a corner, right? And they can't properly, access these institutions. And even when they do, when issues happen, they're able to amicably solve them without too much bottlenecks.
How do the CBN corporate governance guidelines promote ethical behavior in financial institutions?
It's still guided by the corporate governance, framework of of 2018. That's the NCCG, and beyond that, it's just simple. It's standard practice for banks to say, okay, number one, when you look at some of the in intricate details of the NCCG and even the Corporate Governance Act, right, for ethical banking, from number one, the board structure, right, of the financial institution, the both non-interest banks, commercial banks, mortgage banks do have guidelines for their board structure and their composition. And why this is important is because the banks in itself, the operation of the banks now become more formalized, right? No money is leaving the system without it properly being accounted for. No investment is happening without it being properly accounted for, ensuring that people's funds are safe. And then you also have how they also interact with consumers, the roles and responsibilities of the board, the roles and responsibility of the executive directors, of non-executive directors, of the CEO, of the managing directors, and then you also look at the interactions of the bank with the people as well, right? So ensuring even down to customer service, right? That's one. All of these ethical banking practices are why we have a customer service desk at a bank to hear your problem and ensure that you are assisted with that problem, right? The end-to-end process. So I would say these are some of the moves that have been made, and to ensure that number one, all of the interactions that I mentioned earlier between the bank and the consumer is properly, catered for and protected. So yes, I'll say those are some of the things that the central bank, sorry, has been able to put in place from to ensure that consumer protection and ethical banking work side by side. Is that straight line?
Thank you. How effective is the CBN in enforcing penalties against unethical banking practices?
The current administration, right, current administration of the central bank has done a very good job in terms of monetary policy and ensuring that there is a sound financial ecosystem here in Nigeria. And I think this takes us to the very core of the responsibilities of the central bank, right? So the central bank, what are the primary responsibilities of the central bank? First of all, is price stability, ensuring that inflation and exchange rate prices are stable. Then you look at that it is the banker's bank. By banker's bank, it means that it is the bank to other banks, right? All the other commercial banks, deposit money banks, non-interest banks, right? The central bank controls how they operate, right? By providing guidelines and governance rules like the ethical banking one, the corporate governance rules, right? And then you look at the final thing, which not the final now, but the third and very important responsibility of the central bank regarding this conversation is ensuring a sound financial system. And a sound financial system means that number one, inflow and outflow of cash, right, or assets, financial assets within an economy is properly accounted for. Number two, that people are safe, like people's funds are safe, like I had mentioned this earlier, because the money that the banks use, right? It's not necessarily theirs. It's monies of myself and you. We've deposited those monies. And how do those monies triple? How do the banks make profit? They make profit by giving out loans or investing. And as such, the governance rules of the central bank guide those interactions between the commercial bank and the people, and also the interactions with themselves and all the other investments that they make, ensuring that the funds that they take from that they have from people that they use in maybe investments or they use to give out loans, that those actions are properly protected, that people's funds are not lost because of those transactions that they have engaged in. And that's why there's such a thing like the SDF corridor, the standard lending and deposit corridor within the central bank, where if banks are not investing in other assets, right, or giving loans as much as they should, they can also put their money with the central bank and gain interest to improve their profits. So those are some of the moves that I would say the central bank has been doing to ensure that your funds are safe, ethical banking practices are made, and there's also the fact that we're also seeing a lot more digital transparency between central bank not central banks, deposit money banks. And that's because we're seeing a lot more understanding and nuance of how quickly the macroeconomy is evolving. People are doing a lot more transfers on their phone. So what that means is that the central bank has to work closely with the NIBSS, right, to ensure that settlement payments are made very quickly. There is the turnover, there is the time limit for transfer payments. When you if your transfers are not received, yes, there are guidelines to ensure that your money gets back to you within a 24-hour window, right? You can now report directly to the central bank on certain issues. So these are some rules and placements that the central bank has made. And to be very honest, this just didn't start right with the current administration. The reason why I highlighted it is because we are now under a more orthodox monetary policy environment, and that in itself, spotlights a lot of the changes that the central bank is making and has made. Over the last couple of years, I would say 10 years, Nigeria's central bank has done a very good job in ensuring that the ecosystem between in the financial ensuring the financial ecosystem is sound and is transparent enough for investors, for business owners, and even for consumers.
How can the CBN ensure banks treat customers fairly during loan recovery?
I would say that this is a question not just only for banks, but even like other fintech institutions that are coming up, right? Other digital payment systems that are coming up that provide loans, to consumers, have access to direct consumers and provide loans. We've had situations of where some people's obituary are posted online just simply because they are owing money, or their financial situation is broadcasted, right? Just so that these people can get their money back. Now, what that tells us is that, and what that tells the central bank really is that we're now operating in a very different environment, where guidelines that apply to traditional banks might also apply to digital payment banks, right? And smaller payment banks, even microfinance banks, right? Microfinance institutions. As a matter of fact, any financial institution that is engaging in providing loans. Number two, what that also tells us is that in terms of loan recovery, there has to now be a proper credit infrastructure to ensure that the people that are collecting these loans are qualified to actually get these loans and are qualified to repay, to avoid issues of loan recovery. And that applies on an individual basis, because for institutions, commercial banks do take a lot of procedures, a lot of guiding actions to ensure that their funds are recovered. Traditional banks also ensure that if they're gonna give a loan to someone individual, you have assets that can recover that loan, or at least cover 80% of that loan, and the rest goes into debts that they are unable to, recover, bad debts, right, or bad loans. So I will say that the central bank is doing what it can, but with the new wave of financial services and financial institutions that we're seeing, and how loan recovery is becoming more difficult, there is room for further governance and guidelines to ensure that loan recovery is better, for especially for smaller loans. And number two, there's a proper credit infrastructure to ensure that we're giving people to ensure that there's proper credit worthiness checks, and that the right people are giving loans to right set of people are giving loans, pretty much. I think that's already kind of happening. We're seeing a lot more public forums across different banks, different tiers of banks, where they're engaging with stakeholders, and the central bank is also doing the same. We're also seeing a lot more nuanced customer service delivery. And by nuanced customer service delivery, I mean there's almost no bank now that doesn't have a digital assistant, right? From Ifoma to Norma to Bode to Jide, you have that digital service assistant that is, answering questions for you and ensuring that there's proper financial ethics um in line with the consumer protection framework, right? That is happening between banks, as financial institutions, and the consumer. So I will say that it's happening, but in terms of the future, right? Of course, there are expectation for more stakeholder engagement. There's room for more public, sector sensitization, and awareness, right? Awareness campaigns. Number three, I will say that there is also room for more corporate governance work, especially within the non-traditional banking system, right? Ensuring that people's funds primarily are safe, because again, the beginning of this conversation is people actually trusting a financial institution with their funds, with their money, ensuring it for safekeeping. That's why we're no longer putting monies under our mattresses. And that's why the central bank in itself even wants to bring in people from the rural sector into the formal banking system, right? So until we need to build that trust, and that can only happen with more stakeholder engagement, a proper credit infrastructure to check for credit worthiness, and sensitization with the public.
What impact does ethical banking have on financial institutions' goals set by the CBN?
I think that the straight line to the financial inclusion goal from ethical banking is trust. I boil it down to simply trust. That the grandma or great grandma in the village can trust a financial institution to keep her cash that she's not seeing under her mattress or under her stove or tied in her wrapper, and she trusts that that bank will not run away with her money. It boils down to trust. And the ethical banking guidelines are one way to build that trust. But financial institutions have to speak the language of the woman that doesn't yet trust them, or the man that doesn't yet trust them. And what that looks like in practice is breaking the language barriers, right? You're going to those places, you speak their language. If it's Yoruba, you speak in Yoruba. If it is in Igbo, you speak in Igbo. Now, beyond the language barrier and speaking their language, number two, they also have to people that, and they have to create policies and be around people that they can relate and understand. Now, what that means or what that looks like in practice is you have a you have the CEO of a bank maybe going to, maybe not the CEO, or maybe a regional branch manager, right? Going to a village, right? Or a local area to get people to sign up to own bank accounts in that area. For them to actually know that this person understands the struggles that I face earning this 10,000 naira that I'm earning, right? And for me to put that money, the person has to speak their language. The person has to look the part, play the part, speak the part. The third thing is agency banking. We're seeing a lot of POS merchants rise up. We're seeing a lot of cashback agents rising up in different places, be it through restaurants or the woman at the market. Proper guidelines to ensure that there is no form of extortion between that woman that already doesn't trust the banking system and this POS merchant and the broader financial institution or the bigger financial institution. There has to be guiding rules to ensure that there's no form of extortion happening. And even when guidelines are brought from the urban areas, they have to also translate in a better way to rural areas. And what that means in practice is the transfer charge, for instance, in Lagos, say in VI, might not necessarily be the same, right? In Anagege or when you go to Ondo State. The reason being that the level of income or the consumer class in all of those areas are different. And as such, you can't apply the same rule. You can't apply the same rule for agency banking in VI to a woman in Ondo State, right? So we need to think about what that means, ensuring that there's no level of price discrimination. Again, the simple straight line is trust.
It's time for Now Streetwise, where we go out into the streets to find out what Nigerians think about the CBN and its responsibilities.
Have you ever felt cheated by a bank?
Yeah, I've really been cheated upon series of times by banks. At times, you don't get alert for certain debits. So at the end of the month, you just see that for instance, if your account balance ought to be like 120,000, and at the end of the month, you may end up seeing 116,400. They know definitely that you will not have the time to come to the bank to ask. You may waive that another time, but a time will come that you approach the bank. So when it happened to me series of times, I had to walk into the bank. It took my time. I walked into the bank. They eventually did the reversal, but the other previous ones were not successful.
Countless times they used to cheat me, in fact, but I never go to ask. The fact is that sometimes if I have 10,000 naira, maybe I need to use that 10,000 naira, and all of a sudden 50 naira will be deducted, or 18 or 100 naira. You know, that 10,000 naira is not complete anymore. So I will now be looking for another means to complete it. So, but I never go to bank. But I used to feel sad normally because I hustle for the money.
I've had transaction fail, but I've had it reverted. I've not seen a situation where cheated. No, not exactly, but at least maybe the bank failed and I didn't get my money. No, but once the transaction fails, I go to the bank, I use the app, and I get my money back.
Did you know that the CBN can help in such situations?
Of course, yes, because CBN is the latest bank. All commercial banks fall, even non-merchant bank, whatever financial institution falls under CBN. And aside that, before I approach CBN, I can always approach Public Complaints Commission. Through Public Complaints Commission, they talk to the appropriate authority, which is the CBN. So CBN may start, if they have series of complaints like that, they may sanction the commercial bank. But how many people will have the time to do that?
If the system is working well, the CBN is the better place to go. But actually, I don't know if they can help me.
I know CBN can help, but I've not used CBN for any of the failed transactions.
If the banks explain deductions from your account, would you?
Actually, I don't feel better because they were telling me a service charge, this, that, so many jargons that are not even palatable to my hearing at all, to my hearing and for my hearing. Do you understand? I just discovered that each branch look for a way to settle their staff. They pay their salaries by extorting money, arbitrarily extorting money from their customers. And they know if a bank branch has over 3,000 customers and we take like 2,500 customers account, they dip hand into their account, then out of the 2,500 is only small proportion that will show face. And there's no follow-up, it ends there. To the disadvantage of the customer and to the bad advantage of the bank.
I would, if there's any form to fill to stop deducting the money, I can even feel it. Because even if they explain to me, I will still feel bad.
No, I will not be happy because at that point in time, maybe an important transaction that I want to use, and then the delay may have caused some form of disruption or inconvenience. Yes, the money is reverted there, but it's not on the time I wanted to use my money.
Welcome back from Now Streetwise. What are your thoughts on Nigerians from Now Streetwise?
I will say I definitely empathize with people. This is clearly the harsh reality of many Nigerians, and it does make sense when you look at the numbers on the fact that over 60% of Nigerians, live below minimum wage, right? So it does make sense that every naira that they earn it counts to them and it counts for them. But to the banking system, I will say that this is definitely a reason to properly sensitize people and explain what these charges are for, why they are being debited, how recurrently they should be debited. Because there's nothing more painful than being debited on an amount of money you've planned for. Right? You didn't expect the charge and then you're getting debited for it without any prior notice that this was coming, right? So there has to be a lot more sensitization and explanation from banks as to what these charges are for, when they are coming, so people can actually plan for them. The money might look small, but when you aggregate it, it is a lot. It might be 5 naira or 25 naira, 50 naira, right? Multiply that maybe on a weekly basis, especially even like card maintenance fees and all of that. Multiply that, on a weekly basis and then on a monthly basis and then on an annual basis. People actually spend time to calculate this amount of money to see how much they lose to the banking system. Most of the pain points for everyone I've heard here today is hidden charges. They did not expect the money, and yet their money was taken without any prior explanation. And because of how minuscule it looked, they could not just go to the bank. Like, how do I want to go to the bank to complain about 15 naira? Right? Waste my transport, spend 200 naira to go and complain about 15 naira. So it does make sense as to why people will be hurt. But it also means that there is room for improvement within the banking system to ensure there's more transparency and sensitization alongside with these charges so people know. And for the central bank, harmonizing all of these charges and standardizing it and ensuring that there's also clear public awareness, as to what changes have been made regarding the charges that people are being debited for.
Thank you for joining the discussion. My guest is Dumebi Oluwole, and we've been discussing CBN and ethical banking practices in Nigeria. Before we come to the end of today's program, here is a quiz for you. How does the CBN regulate ethical banking practices in Nigeria? How does the CBN regulate banking practices in Nigeria? Send your answers starting with Inside CBN Now to the WhatsApp number 0809 682 2595. 0809 682 2595. The first correct answer gets a prize. Thanks for being part of the program today. Until next time, I am Abiodun Adelowore.